feel like you in a real chill vibe tonight.
Yeah, absolutely. Of course, I realized that it wasn't chill vibes between like Jerry and Stephen A. Smith. Or I guess I can't even say Jerry. Stephen A. Smith was coming at the brand, right? Like at the 105.3 The Fan.
105 The Fan.
I was like, hey, man, what was that about?
That's how we kick off our Cowboys conversation. Has Jerry Jones gotten his money's worth out of Dak Prescott so far? And obviously, Stephen A. Smith had some things to say about that. Ruben, cut number 12. Here is what, actually, let's back up first. Let's start with cut number 11.
First take.
Jerry, what is your response to Stephen A. Smith saying you haven't gotten your money out of Dak Prescott just yet?
I can say that's not correct. The reason that not the reason that's unfair to Dak, unfair to all the other players on the team, but the strength that I look at of our chance to win a championship is Dak and his leadership at that position. But his leadership, but because he plays that position. Let me say it that way. And so I would not, and he didn't expect me to, I'm sure, but I don't think that's accurate. Dak brings us the separator. But now, does that mean that Dak's going to win every game or make every comeback or every key situation? You can answer that one. Of course not. But by the same token, if you were constructing the possibility of competing for a Super Bowl, I would start on this team. I would start right there with Dak. He's that integral to us really being able to have the year we want to have.
Okay. Stephen A. Smith decided to respond to Jerry's comment, to his response about Dak Prescott and whether or not he got his money's worth. Here's what First Takes Stephen A. Smith had to say.
First of all, let me say this. What was that? What would that radio say? That 105.3.
The Fan. You know what it is.
105 The Fan. Let me tell y'all something.
Wait.
Let me tell y'all
Stop
Press pause.
right there. Shout out to Molly Karam.
That's right.
Because Molly Karam said, look, you know what that brand is. You know exactly what radio station that is. Quit playing out here and just address the man if you got something to say. So shout out to Molly Karam. Had to make sure we stop down and thank her for giving us our flowers here at 105 through the Fan and recognizing the brand itself. Continue, please.
Let me tell y'all something. Let me tell y'all something out there. You can't divide me and Jerry. You can try. You can't divide me and my Libra brother. It ain't going to work. Now, I understand Jerry Jones got to take that posture. He's got to take that posture. But he's the one cutting that check, not me. He's the one that's been waiting for a Super Bowl championship, not me. He's the one that doled out $95 million over the last 2 years for that quarterback, not me. So he can take that position and y'all can listen to exactly what he's saying. And I'm not saying he's lying, but what else is he supposed to say? Is he supposed to sit up there and say, in Rush, I trust? I don't care about Dak Prescott. Is that what he's supposed to say? 105 The Fan, stop it. The fact of the matter is Jerry Jones is going to take the posture that he's going to take because he has no choice. Listen, I don't have anything against. That's my brother right there. It's them damn Cowboy fans that get on my nerves. But Jerry Jones, he should run hot and cold because it looks like I'm rooting against the Cowboys. I'm not rooting against them. I'm rooting for the misery of that damn sorry, nauseating, disgusting fan base that gets on my last damn nerves.
The irony of all that is that Stephen A. Smith's a Cowboys fan.
Oh.
Yeah.
That's where we start. Okay, go ahead. ISO!
Yeah, like, come on, man. Anybody who has ever put on that hard to discredit anything about anything in life clearly is a fan of. Stephen A. Smith, I've always long contended is a fan of the Dallas Cowboys. He just doesn't want to admit it because that would hurt the brand.
I think also Stephen A. Smith, well, he's a proud New Yorker, so they do that.
Right.
But like Stephen A. Smith is a consummate TV man. Obviously, he started in journalism and built his way in. But he's a consummate TV man. And if there's one thing about like being that in the way that he is that it's anything for the show and understanding the way that the Cowboys are indeed America's team. The ratings are always up if the Cowboys playing good, bad, or ugly, and the way that they move the needle. He's like, look, man, we don't talk about these here Cowboys to get these numbers, to get these ratings so that I could justify these big old paychecks.
Speaking of that needle and the Cowboys being the needle mover of the NFL, you see the numbers from Fox.
boy.
Yesterday's game, or I'm sorry, Sunday afternoon's game.
I don't remember exactly what the number is, but I could tell you the number pretty easily. Big. Very big. In fact, the biggest number of any NFL game to this point in the season, which, duh, right? Like if you want to find the most watched game of any season, pinpoint the Cowboys playing one of like the traditional powers in the NFL, a la Cowboys Packers or Cowboys Steelers. One of those things happens, that's the biggest game of the season. Not surprising.
29 million of us watched the Cowboys and the Packers on America's Game of the Week on Fox. The most watched NFL game this season on any network.
And while watching that, funny enough, because I actually didn't get to watch that live really. Like I kind of peeked over, I caught a few things. I watched a lot of this secondary. I watched it yesterday a lot, and then this morning, I went into all 22 and kind of drilled down on some particular things. There's obviously been a ton of Dak Prescott conversation, as we just alluded to in the Stephen A. Smith, right, in the national realm. Again, Cowboys, national, everybody's team. America's team, I should say. I felt kind of weird watching these games because, again, I heard a lot of the backlash before I went to the game. Mm-hmm. And it felt like there was a little bit of a dichotomy there. There was a little bit of dissonance there for me because it didn't feel like Dak had as bad of a game as I perceived the backlash to say that he did. Did you feel the same way?
So, in a lot of ways, I was conflicted with some of this because when you look at the performance itself in its totality, this quarterback helped stake you to a 14-point lead going into the fourth quarter.
Correct.
And some of the mistakes that he made can be both blamed on him and the receiver. Play concept, decision-making, all of those things taken into account, you can put at the feet of Dak Prescott and CeeDee Lamb when it comes to how these things played out interception-wise on Sunday. But here's the biggest thing, because I believe perception is reality, and no such thing speaks louder to me than that in the NFL. How differently are we looking at Dak Prescott if he's a $30 million quarterback versus a $40 million one? Because let's say the Cowboys had gotten this deal done with him, a couple of years ago, when the going rate at the time was, roughly $30 to $32 million, maybe 20, let's say $29 to $32 million for the Jared Goffs of the world, the Carson Wentz's of the world. How differently are we looking at him as a $30 million quarterback versus a $40 million quarterback? Because we know that's the going rate for quarterbacks now. I feel like that perception versus the reality for Dak would be just a little bit different. But because that 4 is attached to his contract at $40 million, we look at him much differently, fair or foul. But Walchuk made a great point, I thought, earlier on the G-Bag Nation, where he said, look, we got to quit talking about the contract and the nonsense that's associated with it, because that is what quarterbacks in this league are getting paid based on the skyrocketing of salaries at that position and the importance that has been placed on in the NFL. So I'm not here to assign, contractual value relative to performance, because again, that's the going rate for these quarterbacks these days in my mind.
Yeah, I'm also wondering where he actually rates when we talk about the guys who are being paid. And then also you consider rookie contracts, those things of that nature. There's a lot of different things, because I do find that really interesting as a conversation, just because, again, framing the framework of these things matters. Secondly, the funny part was, I knew you was going to bring it back to the front office, like these conversations. But in the way that you're going to bring it elsewhere, that conversation of the game that he had yesterday, I think the larger context that was also necessary for me was Kellen Moore. And of course, this was somebody texted in as we're talking about Dak Prescott that, again, he had you in a place where you're up 14 points. And I'm not the dude who gives the quarterback all the responsibility and then all the praise, all the blame. I'm not the dude who does that on either way. But again, you were up 14 in spite of the 2 interceptions that he threw. Were you not? Right? Like that 28-14 came later through those interceptions. But both of those interceptions, there were portions of them that split, or like responsibility split a whole bunch of different ways. I don't think that we squarely place those on the quarterback. And maybe the reason why people are loudest about the quarterback is because of that number. I do understand that. But that first one lingers in my mind because that's just a terrible route combination. having both your tight end, your wide receivers stacked on each other. And maybe that's not, in fact, how the route combination was supposed to happen. Maybe there was supposed to be more spacing in the way that they lined up. Maybe they were supposed to run those routes differently. Ultimately, it feels like that still will come to the offensive coordinator because execution matters, right? But that happens, and then you have Dak trying to throw with some anticipation. I wonder how much, as I was watching this game, I wonder how much of this falls on like us, the media. Because I remember we had Dave Hellman on, and I asked him about how people would feel if Dak Prescott was throwing more with that like anticipation people have talked about a lot, and it wasn't necessarily going all that well. And that's what it felt like Sunday rather, was a game in which Dak was trying to throw with the anticipation. It didn't quite link up, and everybody's like coming down hard on him. Because historically, through Dak's tenure, he has been a somewhat risk-averse quarterback. He's willing to check down, take three, make sure that points get on the board, as opposed to like really pressing the issues in some ways. There were, I think, at least in both of those interceptions cases, without talking about the wider scope of the game, felt like that was the thing that happened, is that he was trying to throw with the anticipation and trying to force the issue in some ways. And it's kind of interesting that this has been the response that people have largely gotten.
Well, there's two things for me here. Number one, the insinuation by Stephen A. Smith that Dak Prescott is the weakest link is asinine to me. Because you look at the deficiencies on this team, you can go down a long list before you get to Dak Prescott being the weakest link on this football team. That's number one. Number two, when you look at what CeeDee Lamb and these receivers and the connection that they have with Dak Prescott, one thing that you can lay at the foot and at the door of Dak Prescott and these receivers is the fact that you should not be having these communication issues at this point in your tenures in your career, having worked together as long as you have. Now, I know, obviously, that Dak Prescott did not play a majority of, obviously, CeeDee Lamb's rookie year because of all the injury that he dealt with, obviously, back in 2020. But since then, you've had enough time on the field together to where these communication issues and breakdowns should not be happening. We were looking at this last year. You remember the Saints game where it felt like there were multiple times where CeeDee Lamb and Dak Prescott were not on the same page.
Yeah.
So for the fact that we are still talking about this, to me, is concerning. Now, whether you want to lay that at the feet of Kellen Moore and some of the play design and concepts that he's putting out there.
He has a portion of it, yeah.
You can lay that at some of him.
And we'll talk about some of the wide receivers or the receiving corps' responsibilities with that later in the show, because I do think that that's something that people have talked about, and in some ways we talked around with the Odell Beckham Jr. speculation and those things, so we will get into that. But yeah, I do think that there needs to be some evening out of this discussion. But of course, the way that our conversations go with football is we're going to talk about the quarterback. And I do think that it's fair to mention that it wasn't a great game from Dak.
No, it was not.
Now, and some of that also, and again, this feels like I am cop and please for Dak. I do want to make sure that it's known. I think that he bears his responsibility in this game. 46 throws? Like, I don't think that's the recipe for success for any team really often, is having your quarterback have to throw the football, especially a team that we had all pretty solidified on the idea that this was a team that you wanted to run first with.
Yeah.
Was it not? And I guess the idea that just Zeke is no longer available and now that goes out the window, that feels weird to me.
Yeah, the idea of throwing the ball 46 times with the way that your ground game has been performing so far this year is really kind of odd, because you look at what you were able to do running the football with Tony Pollard over the last 7 weeks. You want to continue to ride that and continue to put pressure, on Green Bay to have to respond to you. Now, I do like this text here on the DetroitRed.com text line 877-881-1053. When you look at what Dak overcame in terms of his mistakes to help get a 2-score lead, that's what you want to see in your quarterback. And those are some of, obviously, the redeemable qualities of Dak Prescott, is the resiliency, the leadership, the forgetting of mistakes when they happen, to bounce back and be able to make things happen when he's capable of doing so. The problem is that having to overcome over and over and over again at times has been what Cowboys fans don't necessarily appreciate about Dak Prescott. Now, again, to me, he is a top 10 quarterback in this league. At his best, we've seen him. This is a guy who was a legitimate MVP candidate last year through the first 6 games of the year, obviously peaking against the New England Patriots in that overtime win, oddly enough, connecting with CeeDee Lamb for that game-winning touchdown. So there's a lot of blame to be placed on a lot of different people. Dalton Schultz not flattening out his route enough. CeeDee Lamb doing the same. Kellen Moore and some of the game planning and decisions based on what your running game was doing. Dak Prescott and his decision-making overall. It was funny because on the first interception that he threw, so the Cowboys are up 7-0. They get the turnover, and they're inside the red zone. on second down, Dak Prescott makes a decision as he's rolling out to his right. He gets a negative 2-yard loss. Instead of throwing the ball away and still remaining somewhat on schedule based on down and distance, in the red zone, you take a 2-yard loss. Next play, you throw an interception. Those small decisions make the difference in a ball game where the margin of error is as thin as it is in the NFL. So there are going to be a lot of questions, I think, going forward for him, as it has been for the last couple of years, as we're into year 7 of this.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's the thing that a lot of people are frustrated with, the idea that, okay, he needs to get better, he needs to develop.
Like, why are we still talking about some of these things in year 7?
Right, and some of this is like an approach issue. Because, again, I talked about the idea of, like, the approach of being aggressive rather than being a little bit more passive and careful, right? Reserved, risk-averse, whichever words you want to use. I also remember a play in which I think there was like the CeeDee Lamb wheel route, and then you have Tony Pollard kind of sneak out to the flats. Dak looks and kind of peeks over there, just overthrows it, throws it right out of bounds over Tony Pollard's head, if you remember that play. In that play, you have somebody dragging across the field that you can dump off to and pick up 5 yards instead of having a throwaway. And it felt like, to me, that was indicative of a Dak Prescott that probably could have tried to make that play, like not necessarily the play that gets you everything, but also staying on schedule, like the smaller things. And it feels like maybe not being super aggressive, but also still managing to make small, staying on, like if you're not going to be an aggressive quarterback, then you've got to stay on schedule. And it felt like you didn't get both of those things simultaneously. And of course, it's not only offense that happens in this game. You give up 31 points ultimately. So that is part of this. But Dak Prescott is kind of enigmatic now, in a way, because
which one are you going to get?
Right. Where are you going to get? How consistent is he going to be? And what are the factors that are causing him to change in this? Because I'm really interested to see, or to talk about, what are the things that make him decide to be risk averse versus aggressive? Because I think also those matter when we start talking about the decision making and how this team progresses.
Last thing I'll say quickly on this is that, is some of this overblown? Yeah, of course it is. You know why?
We're right after a loss?
Well, not just in the context of the loss.
Sorry.
But you look what Josh Allen's done over the last few weeks. My man's thrown 6 picks in the last couple of weeks. So quarterbacks are going to go through their spells. But the point is, the consistency that you want to see from this quarterback and the decision-making has to continue to improve. I thought the decision-making as the game went on was much better. But obviously the 2 interceptions were not pretty based on what happened on those routes and the decision-making that Dak Prescott had there.